January 31st, 1968, 02:47 hours. United States Embassy, Saigon, South Vietnam. Military Police Sergeant Ronald Harper watched closed-circuit television monitor showing embassy's front gate when explosion illuminated screen, satchel charge detonating against reinforced gate, creating hole approximately 2 meters wide. Through smoke and debris, Harper observed 19 Viet Cong sappers wearing civilian clothes rush through breach, carrying AK-47 rifles and explosive charges, demonstrating that embassy compound, symbolic heart of American presence in Vietnam, was under direct ground assault for first time in war. Behind sappers, additional Viet Cong fighters established positions in street directing fire at embassy windows, while sappers advanced across courtyard toward Chancery building housing, classified communications equipment, and Ambassador Ellsworth Bunker's offices. Harper had problem that was tactically immediate and strategically catastrophic. Tactically, 5 Marine guards inside embassy versus 19 attackers outside meant defenders were outnumbered nearly 4-1, with attackers holding initiative, having achieved complete surprise. Embassy compound security, 8-foot walls, reinforced gates, guard posts, was designed to prevent random attacks, not coordinated assault by trained combat troops. Strategically, embassy assault occurring simultaneously with Viet Cong attacks on hundreds of targets throughout South Vietnam during Tet holiday ceasefire created circumstances that would shatter American public's confidence in military's assurances that enemy was weakened and that war was being won. The mathematics said, impossible defense with catastrophic implications. 5 Marines with M16 rifles and limited ammunition versus 19 attackers with automatic weapons and explosives meant that holding Chancery building required perfect defensive tactics and extraordinary luck. But defending building was secondary concern. Television cameras filming outside embassy would broadcast images of American diplomatic compound under siege, demonstrating that even supposedly secure Saigon wasn't safe from Viet Cong attack. These images would reach American television audiences within hours, creating cognitive dissonance between military's optimistic assessments claiming enemy was defeated and visual evidence showing enemy attacking America's embassy. Harper made decision in approximately 5 seconds that would buy time for reinforcements, but wouldn't prevent strategic disaster that was already unfolding. He ordered Marines to defend Chancery entrances, preventing sappers from entering building, while radioing for immediate reinforcement from Army units stationed nearby. This decision meant accepting casualties among defenders, but preventing embassy buildings' capture, which would create even worse propaganda impact than mere assault on compound. Think about that calculation. January 31st, 1968, midpoint of Tet holiday, when Vietnamese traditionally observed ceasefire, allowing families to celebrate Lunar New Year. American military leadership had anticipated possible small-scale attacks, violating ceasefire, but not coordinated offensive involving 84,000 Viet Cong and North Vietnamese troops attacking over 100 cities and towns throughout South Vietnam simultaneously. Embassy assault was merely one attack among hundreds, but its location in Saigon with television cameras present meant it would receive disproportionate attention, creating symbolic defeat despite being tactical failure for attackers. What Harper didn't know as he organized embassy defense was that Tet offensive would represent military disaster for Viet Cong, that attackers would fail to achieve objectives, that they would suffer catastrophic casualties exceeding 45,000 killed. That offensive would effectively destroy Viet Cong as military force, requiring North Vietnamese army to assume combat operations for remainder of war. That by every military metric, Tet would be decisive American victory, demonstrating that Viet Cong couldn't hold captured territory and that American firepower would devastate attacking forces. What Harper didn't know was that Tet offensive, despite being military defeat, would prove strategic victory because television coverage would create perception among American public that war was unwinnable regardless of military realities. That images of enemy attacking Saigon would contradict military's optimistic assessments, creating credibility gap that would undermine public support for continued war. That Walter Cronkite, America's most trusted news anchor, would declare after visiting Vietnam that war was mired in stalemate, influencing public opinion more than military statistics showing American victories. What Harper didn't know was that embassy assault would be portrayed in American media as nearly successful operation that almost captured building, when reality was that sappers were killed in courtyard never reaching chancery entrances. That initial press reports would claim embassy was captured, creating headlines screaming, "Viet Cong hold embassy," despite reports being corrected within hours. That these initial false reports would shape public perception more than later corrections, demonstrating that first impressions matter more than facts when managing public opinion. What Harper didn't know was that Tet offensive would mark a turning point in American domestic politics, where President Lyndon Johnson would decide not to seek re-election, recognizing that public support for war had collapsed. That Johnson would announce bombing halt and peace negotiations in March 1968, effectively conceding that military victory wasn't achievable politically, even if achievable militarily. That war would continue 7 more years, but with American commitment declining as public opinion shifted from supporting victory to demanding withdrawal. What Harper didn't know was that North Vietnamese leadership had planned Tet offensive, expecting general uprising of South Vietnamese population supporting Viet Cong and leading to collapse of South Vietnamese government. That this political objective failed completely. No general uprising occurred. South Vietnamese government maintained control. Population didn't support Viet Cong. That, despite failing to achieve political objectives in South Vietnam, offensive achieved different political objective by undermining American public support for war, demonstrating that strategic success depends on affecting decision-makers' calculations rather than achieving battlefield objectives. What Harper didn't know was that embassy assault would become case study in information warfare, demonstrating that perception often matters more than reality when television broadcasts combat into living rooms, creating emotional responses that override rational analysis of military outcomes. That future military operations would require managing media coverage as carefully as managing combat operations, because losing information battle could negate winning military battles. What Harper didn't know was that Viet Cong sappers attacking embassy had expected to hold building for days or weeks, creating propaganda victory by controlling American diplomatic compound. That sappers had carried demolition charges intending to destroy classified equipment and extensive ammunition, expecting prolonged siege. That their deaths in courtyard within 6 hours represented tactical failure, but that mere assault on embassy achieved strategic propaganda value despite not capturing building. What Harper didn't know was that debate about Tet offensive's true meaning would continue for decades, with military historians arguing it was decisive victory, demonstrating enemy's weakness, versus political analysts arguing it was strategic defeat, demonstrating war's futility. That both interpretations were correct within their frameworks. Militarily, Americans won overwhelmingly, but politically offensive destroyed public support, making military victory irrelevant. The mathematics of perception were being written in television footage and newspaper headlines and public opinion polls that would prove that modern warfare involves winning hearts and minds of home population as much as defeating enemy forces on battlefield. And those mathematics would demonstrate that television's power to shape public opinion could determine strategic outcomes regardless of tactical results, when images contradict official narratives, creating credibility crises that undermine political will to continue fighting. By time Marines killed last sapper in embassy courtyard at 08:15 hours, 6 hours after assault began, transformation from defensive success preventing embassy capture to propaganda disaster showing American vulnerability had occurred, and calculation that controlling information environment mattered as much as controlling physical terrain had been made through events that would be studied for generations as example of how tactical victories can produce strategic defeats when media coverage shapes public perception, contrary to military realities. November 1967 to January 1968. 3 months before Tet Offensive, North Vietnamese and Viet Cong leadership planned coordinated attacks throughout South Vietnam, aiming to spark general uprising that would force American withdrawal. North Vietnamese Politburo resolution dated December 1967, documented in captured records, outlined offensive objectives. According to resolution, conduct coordinated attacks on enemy positions throughout South Vietnam during Tet holiday when enemy defenses are reduced by holiday ceasefires. Objectives: demonstrate Viet Cong strength, contradicting American claims of enemy weakness. Spark general uprising of South Vietnamese population against American occupation and puppet government. Capture provincial capitals creating liberated zones. Force enemy to negotiate from position of weakness. Assessment: enemy believes war is being won, making surprise offensive particularly devastating to enemy morale. Success requires coordination, surprise, and willingness to accept heavy casualties, achieving strategic objectives. Planning emphasized attacking visible targets, creating maximum psychological impact. According to operational plan, priority targets include provincial capitals, demonstrating that enemy cannot protect population centers, military bases demonstrating that enemy installations are vulnerable, Saigon targets including American Embassy, Presidential Palace, radio stations, airports demonstrating that even capital is insecure, embassy attack particularly important, capturing American diplomatic compound would demonstrate symbolically that American presence is fragile and that enemy is winning despite propaganda claiming otherwise. Embassy attack will receive international media attention, magnifying psychological impact beyond military significance. Attack preparations required extraordinary secrecy, maintaining surprise. According to intelligence assessment, offensive requires moving approximately 84,000 troops into attack positions without enemy detection. This requires smuggling weapons and ammunition into cities over months, infiltrating fighters disguised as civilians, coordinating timing across hundreds of targets, maintaining operational security despite large numbers involved. Success depends on enemy dismissing intelligence indicators as routine activity rather than recognizing preparation for major offensive. Enemy's confidence that we are weakened by recent battles makes them psychologically unprepared for offensive of this scale. American intelligence detected indicators but misinterpreted significance, according to CIA assessment dated January 1968. Intelligence indicators suggest enemy may violate Tet ceasefire with small-scale attacks. Indicators include increased radio traffic suggesting coordination, weapons caches discovered in cities, captured documents mentioning offensive operations, defector reports of planned attacks. However, assessment is that enemy lacks capability for major offensive after suffering heavy casualties in recent border battles. Likely scenario: limited attacks violating ceasefire to demonstrate continued resistance, but without strategic significance. Recommendation: maintain heightened security during Tet, but don't expect offensive operations. This intelligence failure reflected organizational biases favoring optimistic assessments. According to analysis, MACV, Military Assistance Command Vietnam, under General Westmoreland, had spent 1967 emphasizing progress in war, with public statements claiming enemy was weakening and that American strategy was succeeding. This created institutional pressure to interpret ambiguous intelligence optimistically rather than pessimistically. Indicators that might have suggested major offensive were dismissed as enemy deception or as exaggerations because acknowledging enemy capability for major offensive would contradict prevailing narrative of American progress. Result: intelligence was available but was filtered through organizational biases, preventing accurate assessment. January 30th to 31, 1968. Tet offensive began January 30th, 31, 1968, with coordinated attacks throughout South Vietnam, achieving complete tactical surprise despite intelligence indicators and creating maximum psychological impact through timing and target selection. Initial attacks occurred January 30th in Central Highlands. According to operational timeline, January 30th, 2100 hours. Viet Cong forces attack Nha Trang, Quy Nhon, and other cities in two core area. Attacks appear premature, suggesting coordination problems or intentional feint drawing American attention to Highlands before main attacks on Saigon and other major cities. American response: increase alert status, but assess attacks as limited violations of Tet's ceasefire rather than recognizing as preliminary phase of general offensive. Main offensive began early morning January 31st with simultaneous attacks on over 100 targets. According to after-action assessment, January 31st, 0200 to 0400 hours, approximately 84,000 Viet Cong and North Vietnamese troops attack 36 of 44 provincial capitals, 5 of 6 autonomous cities, 64 district capitals, and numerous military installations throughout South Vietnam. Attacks achieve complete tactical surprise. Defenders are unprepared for offensive of this scale occurring during holiday ceasefire. Initial attacks achieve success, capturing portions of several cities, including substantial parts of Hue, former imperial capital, and penetrating Saigon, including attacks on Presidential Palace, radio stations, and American Embassy. Saigon attacks targeted symbolically significant locations, creating maximum media impact. According to summary, Saigon attacks focused on American Embassy compound, Presidential Palace residence of South Vietnamese President Thieu, Tan Son Nhut Air Base, MACV headquarters, Vietnamese Joint General Staff compound, and radio station. These targets were selected for symbolic value, demonstrating that enemy could attack anywhere, including most heavily defended locations in capital. Embassy attack particularly significant because diplomatic compound represents American sovereignty, making assault powerful symbolic statement that nowhere in Vietnam was secure from Viet Cong operations. Embassy assault involved 19 sappers from C-10 Sapper Battalion trained specifically for embassy operation. According to captured operational plan, Sapper team will assault American Embassy at 02:45 hours January 31st. Mission: breach embassy wall, enter Chancery building, destroy classified equipment, hold compound preventing American use for duration of offensive. Sappers equipped with AK-47 rifles, explosive charges, extensive ammunition expecting prolonged fight. Success criteria: capture embassy creating international propaganda demonstrating American vulnerability. Team prepared for casualties, but mission success requires holding compound regardless of losses. January 31st, 1968. Embassy assault beginning 02:47 hours achieved surprise but failed military objectives while succeeding in creating propaganda impact through television coverage reaching American audiences. Attack sequence documented through multiple witness accounts and physical evidence. According to timeline, 02:47 hours, sappers detonate satchel charge breaching embassy front gate. 19 attackers enter compound, rushing across courtyard toward Chancery building. Marine guards inside Chancery lock steel doors and take defensive positions at windows. 02:48 hours. Marines open fire on sappers in courtyard. Sappers take cover using vehicles and planters as protection, returning fire. 02:50 hours. Additional Viet Cong fighters in street outside embassy direct fire at Chancery windows, providing suppressive fire for sappers. MPs in adjacent buildings and military police. Quick reaction force responding from nearby stations engage Viet Cong outside compound. Defenders prevented sappers from entering Chancery building, according to Marine Guard testimony. We locked Chancery doors as soon as shooting started. Doors were reinforced steel. Sappers couldn't breach them without heavy explosives, which they apparently didn't bring, expecting easier access. Sappers tried shooting door locks, but couldn't penetrate. They took cover in courtyard behind vehicles and concrete planters, returning our fire. Fight became standoff. We couldn't leave building to engage them. They couldn't enter building. Situation continued with sporadic firing for next 6 hours until reinforcements arrived with sufficient numbers to clear courtyard. Television cameras arrived shortly after assault began. According to journalist reports, we heard explosions and gunfire from embassy area around 0300 hours. Multiple news crews responded immediately. Embassy assault was biggest story of night, with numerous attacks occurring throughout Saigon. We arrived finding Viet Cong fighters outside embassy compound exchanging fire with defenders. We filmed from protected positions, showing embassy wall breached, hearing gunfire from inside compound, seeing bodies in street. Initial reports stated embassy was under attack, possibly captured, because we couldn't see inside compound and couldn't communicate with defenders. We reported what we observed, which was embassy surrounded by enemy forces engaging in sustained combat. Initial press reports claimed embassy was captured, creating sensational headlines. According to media analysis, early morning reports from Saigon stated that Viet Cong had captured American embassy. Headlines in afternoon newspapers screamed, "Viet Cong seize embassy" and "Enemy holds embassy compound." These reports were based on early morning confusion when journalists couldn't access compound and couldn't confirm defenders' status. Reports were corrected within hours as situation clarified. Embassy building was never captured. Sappers were killed in courtyard. Chancery remained under American control. However, initial false reports shaped public perception, creating impression that embassy fell even after corrections were published, demonstrating that first reports matter more than subsequent corrections. Reinforcements arrived mid-morning, clearing remaining sappers. According to operational report, 0815 hours, Army paratroopers from 101st Airborne Division and military police units cleared embassy compound, killing remaining sappers who had held positions in courtyard for 6 hours. Final casualty count: all 19 Viet Cong sappers killed, 5 American defenders killed, including 2 MPs and 2 Army soldiers, plus 1 Vietnamese embassy employee. Physical damage: breached front gate, damaged vehicles, broken windows. But Chancery building intact with no breach of security for classified materials. Duration: 6 hours from initial breach to compound secured. Assessment: tactical failure for attackers who achieved no objectives beyond temporary occupation of courtyard, but propaganda success because assault on embassy generated extensive media coverage demonstrating American vulnerability. January 31st to March 2nd, 1968. Tet offensive continued for weeks with major battles in Hue and Saigon, demonstrating that while Viet Cong achieved tactical surprise, American firepower would devastate attacking forces. Hue battle became longest and bloodiest engagement. According to operational summary, Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces captured most of Hue on January 31st, including Citadel, historic imperial fortress, and held city for 26 days. Marines and army units fought house to house, clearing city in intense urban combat. Battle lasted until March 2nd, when final enemy positions in Citadel were overrun. Casualties: approximately 5,000 Viet Cong and North Vietnamese killed, 450 American and South Vietnamese killed, 2,000 plus wounded. Additionally, enemy executed approximately 2,800 civilians during occupation: teachers, government officials, religious leaders, suspected collaborators, in mass killings that would be termed Hue Massacre. City sustained massive damage from street fighting, destroying historic architecture and displacing tens of thousands of civilians. Saigon fighting continued for weeks after initial attacks. According to assessment, while embassy assault ended within hours, fighting throughout Saigon continued for weeks as American and South Vietnamese forces cleared Viet Cong from neighborhoods where attackers had established positions. Cholon District, Saigon's Chinatown, saw particularly intense fighting with airstrikes and artillery used to dislodge entrenched fighters. Fighting created hundreds of thousands of refugees fleeing combat zones. Saigon, that had been largely secure throughout war, became battlefield, demonstrating that no location in South Vietnam was immune from attack. Casualty figures demonstrated offensive was military disaster for attackers. According to MACV assessment dated March 1968, Tet offensive casualties, Viet Cong and North Vietnamese approximately 45,000 killed, 6,000 captured. American approximately 100 killed, 8,000 wounded. South Vietnamese approximately 2,300 killed, 8,000 wounded. Civilian casualties approximately 14,000 killed, 24,000 wounded. These figures demonstrate that offensive was catastrophic defeat for enemy. Casualty ratio of 10.1 in favor of American and South Vietnamese forces shows that enemy was unable to hold captured positions and that American firepower devastated attacking forces. Additionally, enemy achieved none of their stated objectives. No general uprising occurred. Provincial capitals were retaken within days or weeks. South Vietnamese government maintained control. Military assessment concluded overwhelming American victory. According to Westmoreland's report, enemy attacked with everything they had and failed. They suffered catastrophic casualties exceeding 45,000 killed, approximately half their attacking force. They captured no major cities permanently. South Vietnamese army performed better than expected, demonstrating increased capability. Population did not support uprising as enemy anticipated. In fact, civilians largely opposed Viet Cong, who destroyed their homes and executed their officials. From purely military perspective, Tet was decisive defeat for enemy, demonstrating they cannot achieve victory through conventional offensive operations. However, success in military terms must be converted into political gains by exploiting enemy's weakness. February 1968. Television coverage of Tet Offensive created perception among American public that contradicted military assessments, transforming tactical victories into strategic defeat through power of broadcast images. Network news coverage emphasized dramatic visuals over analytical context. According to media analysis, television news covering Tet featured embassy assault showing American compound under attack, street fighting in Saigon showing combat in capital that Americans believed was secure, Hue destruction showing devastation from urban combat, refugee flows showing civilian suffering. These images were powerful and emotionally compelling, creating impression that situation was desperate regardless of military statistics showing American victories. Television's visual nature emphasizes dramatic moments over analytical context, meaning that image of embassy under attack matters more than explanation that attack failed achieving no objectives. Walter Cronkite's February 27th editorial proved particularly influential. Following visit to Vietnam after Tet, Cronkite concluded broadcasts stating that war was mired in stalemate and that negotiated settlement was only realistic outcome. According to analysis, Cronkite was America's most trusted news anchor with credibility exceeding politicians or military leaders' credibility. His declaration that war was unwinnable influenced millions of Americans who trusted his judgment more than government's assurances. President Johnson reportedly stated, "If I've lost Cronkite, I've lost Middle America," recognizing that moderate opinion had shifted against war. Cronkite's editorial demonstrated that media figures' interpretations matter more than government's assessments when credibility gaps exist between official optimism and observed realities. Public opinion shifted dramatically against war support. According to polls, pre-Tet polling showed slim majority supporting war with approximately 50% approval. Post-Tet polling showed approval dropped to approximately 35%, with majority believing war was mistake. This shift reflected cognitive dissonance between military's pre-Tet claims that enemy was weakened and Tet's demonstration that enemy could conduct major offensive. Public concluded that military leadership had misled them about progress, creating credibility crisis where future optimistic assessments would be dismissed as propaganda regardless of accuracy. Media coverage emphasized American vulnerability over enemy losses. According to analysis, news reports focused on embassy assault, showing symbolic American vulnerability, street fighting in Saigon contradicting claims that capital was secure, prolonged battle for Hue, showing enemy could capture and hold major city for weeks. What received less coverage, catastrophic enemy casualties exceeding 45,000 killed, failure to achieve objectives including no general uprising, rapid retaking of captured territory demonstrating American military superiority. Media's emphasis on dramatic visuals showing American positions under attack created impression of American defeat, despite military realities showing overwhelming American victory. This demonstrated that television's narrative choices determine public perception regardless of underlying facts. Johnson administration's credibility collapsed. According to political analysis, administration had spent 1967 claiming progress with Westmoreland's speeches, emphasizing enemy weakness and American advantages. Tet contradicted these claims, demonstrating that enemy retained capability for major operations. This created credibility gap where public no longer trusted government's Vietnam assessments. Future claims of progress would be dismissed as propaganda. Administration's loss of credibility on Vietnam undermined Johnson's domestic agenda as trust in leadership collapsed. This credibility crisis demonstrates that maintaining public support requires aligning assessments with observable realities. When officials' claims diverge too far from public's observations, officials' credibility is destroyed. March 1968. Tet offensive's political consequences transformed American Vietnam policy from pursuing victory to seeking negotiated withdrawal despite military success, demonstrating that domestic politics ultimately determine war policies. Johnson faced political crisis following Tet. According to analysis, President Johnson's approval ratings collapsed post-Tet. Democratic Party divided with anti-war candidate Eugene McCarthy challenging Johnson in primaries. McCarthy's strong showing in New Hampshire primary, March 12th, receiving 42% versus Johnson's 49%, demonstrated that incumbent president faced serious opposition within own party. Robert Kennedy announced candidacy March 16th, further fragmenting Democratic support. Political environment made continuing war policies untenable. Public support had collapsed, making escalation politically impossible. Johnson announced dramatic policy reversal March 31st. According to televised address, Johnson announced partial bombing halt over North Vietnam, willingness to negotiate with North Vietnamese, and decision not to seek re-election. This represented complete reversal from escalation policies pursued since 1965. Johnson's withdrawal from race demonstrated recognition that public support for war had collapsed, making his presidency untenable. Decision prioritized Democratic Party unity over personal political ambitions, acknowledging that continuing as candidate would guarantee Republican victory in November. March 31st, speech marked turning point, where American objectives shifted from military victory to negotiated withdrawal. Military leadership opposed policy changes, arguing Tet proved enemy weakness. According to Westmoreland's assessment, enemy suffered catastrophic defeat at Tet, losing 45,000, killed with nothing to show for losses. Now is time to exploit enemy weakness through increased offensive operations. Recommend: increase troop levels by 200,000, expand ground operations into Cambodia and Laos, attacking enemy sanctuaries, intensify bombing of North Vietnam, destroying enemy's will to continue. Assessment: enemy is weak. Population did not support uprising as enemy expected. Military victory is achievable if given resources and authority to pursue aggressive strategy. Johnson rejected military recommendations, recognizing political impossibility. According to decision memo, military's request for 200,000 additional troops and expanded operations is politically impossible. Public support for war has collapsed. Congress will not approve troop increases. Escalation would create domestic crisis, exceeding Vietnam's strategic importance. Decision: reject troop increases. Implement bombing halt, encouraging negotiations. Shift to Vietnamization strategy, training South Vietnamese forces to assume combat responsibilities, allowing American withdrawal. Reality: military victory may be achievable theoretically, but is politically unattainable, making continuation of current strategy futile. This demonstrated fundamental principle about democratic wars. According to analysis, democracies can sustain wars only with public support. When support collapses, military success becomes irrelevant because political leaders cannot continue policies that public opposes. Tet created situation where military won tactically but lost strategically because public perception of defeat mattered more than military reality of victory. This demonstrates that modern warfare requires winning two battles simultaneously: battlefield battle against enemy forces and political battle maintaining home population's support. Losing either battle produces strategic defeat regardless of success in the other. 1968 to 1975. Following Tet's political impact, American Vietnam policy shifted from pursuing victory to negotiating withdrawal, process that would take 7 years, demonstrating difficulty of extracting forces from unsuccessful interventions. Paris peace negotiations began May 1968, but produced little progress initially. According to negotiation records, negotiations opened May 1968 with American delegation seeking mutual withdrawal of forces and preservation of South Vietnamese government. North Vietnamese delegation demanded complete American withdrawal and coalition government including Viet Cong. Neither side willing to compromise on fundamental issues, producing stalemate in negotiations lasting until 1973. Negotiations demonstrated that parties lacking battlefield incentive to compromise cannot reach agreements through diplomacy alone. Nixon administration elected 1968 pursued Vietnamization strategy. According to policy outline, Vietnamization involves training South Vietnamese forces to assume combat responsibilities, gradual withdrawal of American troops reducing presence from peak of 543,000 in 1969 to zero by 1973, continued American air support and equipment aid maintaining South Vietnamese capability. Objective: achieve peace with honor, avoiding perception of American defeat while extracting forces from conflict that public no longer supports. Reality: Vietnamization allows domestic withdrawal of American forces while acknowledging that South Vietnam's long-term survival without American support is uncertain. American troop withdrawals continued despite continuing combat. According to withdrawal statistics, peak American presence, 543,000 troops in 1969, Withdrawals proceeded, 475,000 by end of 1969, 334,600 by end of 1970, 156,800 by end of 1971, 24,200 by end of 1972, 0 combat troops by March 1973. These withdrawals occurred while combat continued, with last American combat deaths occurring weeks before final withdrawal, demonstrating that extraction was political decision independent of battlefield conditions. Paris Peace Accords, signed January 1973, formally ended American involvement. According to agreement, United States withdraws all forces. North Vietnam can maintain forces in South Vietnam, but won't increase them. Both sides release prisoners. International supervision monitors ceasefire. Agreement allowed American withdrawal while leaving fundamental conflict unresolved. North and South remained enemies, with peace terms requiring voluntary restraint rather than enforced settlement. Predictably, agreement collapsed within months as North prepared final offensive. South Vietnam fell April 1975 when North launched conventional invasion. According to final offensive, North Vietnamese Army launched major offensive March 1975 with 18 divisions attacking South Vietnam. South Vietnamese resistance collapsed rapidly, with demoralized forces retreating chaotically. Saigon fell April 30, 1975. With television cameras showing helicopters evacuating Americans and South Vietnamese from embassy roof, visual echo of Tet embassy assault 7 years earlier, fall demonstrated that South Vietnam couldn't survive without American support, and that Vietnamization had failed achieving stated objective of creating viable, independent South Vietnamese state. Comparison between military and political assessments of Tet demonstrated how tactical victory can produce strategic defeat when media coverage shapes public perception contrary to battlefield realities. Military assessment emphasized overwhelming victory. According to MACV analysis, Tet offensive was catastrophic defeat for Viet Cong and North Vietnamese. Enemy casualties, 45,000 plus killed, representing approximately 50% of attacking force. American casualties, 100 killed, representing approximately 1.3% of forces in theater. Casualty ratio, 10.1 in favor of American forces. Objectives achieved, none. No general uprising, no captured cities held, no collapse of South Vietnamese government. Post-Tet enemy capability, substantially reduced, with Viet Cong essentially destroyed as effective military force. Conclusion: overwhelming American military victory, demonstrating enemy cannot achieve objectives through conventional operations. Political assessment emphasized public perception of defeat. According to analysis, public reaction to Tet, television images of embassy under attack, street fighting in Saigon. Prolonged battle for Hue created impression that war was unwinnable regardless of military statistics. Public concluded military leadership had misled them about progress, creating credibility collapse. Political consequences: Johnson withdrew from presidential race, troop increase requests denied, policy shifted from victory to withdrawal. Strategic outcome: Tet destroyed public support for war, making continued prosecution politically impossible, regardless of military success. Conclusion: Tet was strategic defeat because it eliminated political will necessary to achieve military objectives. Both assessments were accurate within their frameworks. According to comparative analysis, military assessment measuring battlefield outcomes was correct. Tet was decisive tactical victory with enemy suffering catastrophic losses, achieving no objectives. Political assessment measuring domestic support was correct. Tet destroyed public confidence, making war policies unsustainable. Contradiction between assessments reflects reality that wars have multiple dimensions, with success in military dimension not guaranteeing success in political dimension. When public support collapses, military victory becomes meaningless because democratic governments cannot continue wars their populations oppose. North Vietnamese perspective acknowledged military defeat while claiming strategic victory. According to post-war Vietnamese assessment, Tet offensive achieved neither military objectives nor produced expected general uprising. Casualties were catastrophic, weakening our forces substantially. However, offensive achieved critical strategic objective by destroying American public support for war. Television coverage showing our forces attacking Saigon convinced Americans their government had lied about war's progress. This loss of public support led to American withdrawal, making offensive strategic success despite military failure. Lesson: sometimes losing tactically produces victory strategically when tactical losses achieve political objectives more important than battlefield success. Tet Offensive revealed fundamental truths about modern warfare, where television coverage shapes public perception, about gaps between military success and political success, about difficulty of sustaining democratic support for extended wars, and about how information warfare can determine strategic outcomes regardless of battlefield results. First truth: television coverage of war shapes public perception through visual imagery that often contradicts official narratives, creating credibility crises when images diverge from government assessments. Tet produced dramatic television footage showing American embassy under attack, street fighting in supposedly secure Saigon, prolonged battle for Hue, refugees fleeing combat. These images created impression of American vulnerability and defeat regardless of military statistics, showing overwhelming American victory. Television's visual nature emphasizes dramatic moments over analytical context, meaning that emotional impact of images matters more than factual analysis of military outcomes. Public seeing embassy under attack concluded war was going badly, regardless of explanations that attack failed, achieving no objectives. This demonstrates that modern warfare requires managing visual narrative as carefully as managing battlefield operations, because losing information battle can negate winning military battles. Governments that ignore public perception while focusing exclusively on military operations risk strategic defeat despite tactical success. Second truth: credibility gaps between official optimism and observable realities destroy public trust, making future reassurances ineffective regardless of accuracy. Johnson administration spent 1967 claiming progress with military leaders stating enemy was weakened and war was being won. Tet contradicted these claims, demonstrating enemy could conduct major offensive. This created credibility collapse where public concluded they had been misled. Future claims of progress would be dismissed as propaganda regardless of validity. Once credibility is lost through divergence between official assessments and observable realities, restoring trust is nearly impossible. Modern application: governments maintaining public support for policies must ensure official communications align with citizens' observations. When gap becomes too large, credibility collapses, destroying ability to lead effectively. Third truth: democratic governments cannot sustain wars that populations oppose regardless of military achievability, demonstrating that popular support is prerequisite for continued operations. Tet destroyed American public support for Vietnam War, with approval dropping from 50% to 35%. This made continuing war policies politically impossible despite military success. Johnson recognized reality, declining to seek re-election and reversing policies toward negotiations and withdrawal. This demonstrates fundamental constraint on democratic wars. Public support is necessary for continuation, making wars that lose popular support unsustainable regardless of military situation. Authoritarian governments can continue wars despite public opposition, but democracies cannot. This creates asymmetry where authoritarian opponents can outlast democratic powers by sustaining operations until democratic public loses patience. strategy North Vietnamese successfully employed. Fourth truth, strategic success requires achieving political objectives, not just winning tactical battles, making it possible to lose wars while winning battles when political objectives remain unachieved. Americans won virtually every significant battle in Vietnam, including Tet, where enemy suffered 10.1 casualties. But winning battles didn't achieve political objective of creating viable independent South Vietnam that could resist communist forces. Eventually, American public lost patience with inconclusive war-forcing withdrawal despite battlefield success. South Vietnam collapsed within 2 years, demonstrating military victories were insufficient without political settlement, creating stable independent state. This reveals that tactical excellence cannot compensate for strategic incoherence. When political objectives are unclear or unachievable, military success produces no lasting benefits. Fifth truth, information warfare determining public perception can achieve strategic effects exceeding conventional military operations when battlefield outcomes matter less than how those outcomes are portrayed. North Vietnamese recognized that defeating American military was impossible given firepower disparities. Instead, they pursued strategy attacking American public's will to continue war through protracted conflict that would exhaust American patience. Tet exemplified this strategy. Offensive was military disaster, but propaganda success because television coverage convinced Americans that war was unwinnable. North Vietnamese accepted catastrophic casualties, achieving psychological objectives that mattered more than battlefield outcomes. Modern relevance, adversaries recognizing they cannot win militarily, pursue information warfare strategies, attacking domestic support, undermining political will to continue operations. Countering requires winning information battle alongside military battle. Neglecting either dimension produces strategic defeat. Sergeant Ronald Harper's defense of Embassy Chancery Building, preventing Viet Cong from capturing American diplomatic compound, represented tactical success that prevented even worse propaganda disaster. But broader strategic disaster was already occurring through television coverage, showing that supposedly secure Saigon wasn't safe from attack. His tactical success couldn't prevent strategic consequences of visual evidence contradicting official assessments of American progress. The 19 Viet Cong sappers who died in Embassy Courtyard failed military mission but succeeded propaganda mission by forcing televised siege of American embassy. Their deaths demonstrated North Vietnamese willingness to sacrifice forces, achieving psychological objectives through dramatic operations that would be extensively covered, creating disproportionate impact relative to military significance. By offensive's end, with 45,000 Viet Cong dead and American forces having retaken all captured territory, overwhelming military victory by any metric, strategic transformation from American confidence to American withdrawal had occurred through television's power to shape perception, regardless of battlefield realities. Mathematics proving that modern warfare requires winning hearts and minds of home population as much as defeating enemy forces were written through Tet's demonstration that losing public support produces strategic defeat despite tactical dominance. The embassy in Saigon, where Viet Cong briefly held courtyard before being killed, became symbol of American vulnerability despite attack's failure. Final image of American Vietnam involvement would come 7 years later, April 30, 1975, when helicopters evacuated Americans and South Vietnamese from same embassy's roof as North Vietnamese forces entered Saigon. This visual bookend demonstrated that Tet's psychological impact proved more consequential than its military outcome, with television images mattering more than casualty statistics when determining war's outcomes.